Hi guys, welcome back to The Witches by Roald Dahl. This is the last two chapters of the book, guys, and it's Christmas Eve, so happy Christmas to you all, guys. This is all Roald Dahl's own work. I'm just reading it for entertainment and pleasure. Let's get reading. The Heart of the Mouse. It was lovely to be back in Norway once again in my grandmother's fine old house, but now that I was so small, everything looked different, and it took me quite a while to find my way around. Mine was a world of carpets and table legs and chair legs and a little crannies behind large pieces of wood furniture. A closed door could not be opened and nothing could be reached that was on a table. But after a few days, my grandmother began to invent gadgets for me in order to make my life a little easier. She got a carpenter to put together a number of slim, tall step ladders, and she placed one of these against each table in the house so that I could climb up whenever I wanted to. She herself invented a wonderful door-opening device made out of wires and springs and pulleys, with heavy weights dangling on cords, and soon every door in the house had a door opener on it. All I had to do was press my front paws onto a tiny wooden platform, and hey presto, a spring would stretch, a weight would drop, and the door would swing open. Next, she rigged up an equally ingenious system whereby I could switch on the light whenever I entered a room at night. I cannot explain how it worked because I know nothing about electricity, but there was a little button let into the floor near the door in every room in the house, and when I pressed the button gently with one paw, the light would come on. When I pressed it a second time, the light would go off again. My grandmother made a tiny toothbrush using a matchstick for the handle, and onto this she stuck bits of bristle. Sorry, I was getting a bit lost where I was. Sorry, I'll read that sentence again. My grandmother made me a tiny toothbrush using a matchstick for the handle, and into this she stuck little bits of bristle that she had snipped off one of her hairbrushes. You must not get any holes in your teeth, she said. I can't take a mouse to a dentist. He'd think I was crazy. It's funny, I said, but ever since I became a mouse, I hated the taste of sweets and chocolate, so I don't think I'll get holes. You are still going to brush your teeth after every meal, my grandmother said, and I did. For a bathtub, she gave me a silver sugar basin, and I bathed in it every night before going to bed. She allowed no one else into the house, not even a servant or a cook. We kept entirely to ourselves, and we were very happy in each other's company. One evening, I lay on my grandmother's lap in front of the fire. She said to me, I wonder what happened to that little Bruno. I would be surprised if his father gave him to the hall porter to drown in the fire bucket, I answered. I'm afraid you may be right, my grandmother said, the poor little thing. We were silent for a few minutes, and my grandmother puffing away at her black cigar while I dozed comfortably in the warmth. Can I ask you something, Grandmama? I said. Ask me anything you like, my darling. How does a mouse live? Ah, she said. I've been waiting for you to ask me that. There was a silence. She sat there smoking away and gazing at the fire. Well, I said, how long do we live? Asked Mice. I've been reading about mice, she said. I've been trying to find out everything I can about them. Go on then, Grandmama, why don't you tell me? If you really want to know, she said, I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for very long. How long? I asked. Well, an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years, she said. But you are not an ordinary mouse. You are a mouse person, and that is a very different matter. How different? I asked. How long does a mouse person live, Grandmama? Longer, she said, much longer. A mouse person will almost certainly live for 3 times as long as an ordinary mouse, my grandmother said. About 9 years. Good, I cried. That's great. It's the best news I've ever had. Why'd you say that? She asked, surprised. Because I would never want to live longer than you, I said. I couldn't stand being looked after by anybody else. There was a short silence. She had a way of fondling me behind the ears with the tip of my one finger. It felt lovely. How old are you, Grandmama? I asked. I'm 86, she said. Will you ever live another 8 years or 9 years? I might, she said, with a bit of luck. You've got to, I said, because by then I'll be very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother, and soon after that we'll both die together. That'll be perfect, she said. I had a little dose after that. I just shut my eyes and thought of nothing, and I felt peace with the world. Would you like me to tell you something about yourself that is very interesting? My grandmother said. Yes, please, Grandmama, I said, without opening my eyes. I couldn't believe it at first, but apparently it's quite true, she said. What is it? I asked. The heart of a mouse, she said. And that means your heart is beating at the rate of 500 times a minute. Isn't that amazing? That's not possible, I said, opening my eyes wide. It is as true as I'm sitting here, she said. It's a sort of miracle. That's nearly 9 beats every second, I cried, working it out in my head. Correct, she said. Your heart is going so fast it's impossible to hear the separate beats. All, all one hears is a soft humming sound. She was wearing a lace dress, and the lace kept tickling my nose. I had to rest my head on the front paws. Have you ever heard my heart humming away, Grandmama? I asked her. Often, she said. I hear it when you are lying very close to me on the pillow at night. Two of us remained silent in front of the fire for a long time after that, thinking about these wonderful things. My darling, she said at last, are you sure you don't mind being a mouse for the rest of your life? I don't mind at all, I said. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you. Next chapter. It's off to work we go. For supper that evening, my grandmother had a plain omelette and one slice of bread. I had a piece of that brown Norwegian goat's milk cheese known as gyros, which I loved even when I was a boy. We ate in front of the fire, my grandmother in her armchair, and me on the table with my cheese on a small plate. Grandmama, I said, now that we have done away with the Grand High Witch, will all the other witches in the world gradually disappear? I'm quite sure they won't, she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. But they must, I cried. Surely they must. I'm afraid not, she said. But if she's not there any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who is going to give them orders and judge them up at the annual meetings and invent their magic formulas for them? When a queen bee dies, there is always another queen in the hive ready to take her place, my grandmother said. It's the same with witches. In the great headquarters where the Grand High Witch lives, there is always another Grand High Witch waiting in the wings to take over should anything happen. Oh no, I cried. That means everything we did was all for nothing. Have I become a mouse for nothing at all? We saved the children of England, she said. I don't think we call that nothing. I know, I cried, but that's not nearly good enough. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after we got rid of their leader. Now you tell me that something is going on just the same before. Not exactly as before, my grandmother said. For instance, there are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it? But what about the rest of the world? I cried. What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway? You must not think I have been sitting back and doing nothing these last few days, she said. I have been giving a great deal of thought and time to that particular problem. I was looking up at her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed a little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes and the corners of her mouth. Why are you still smiling, Grandmama? I asked her. I have some rather interesting news for you, she said. What news? Shall I tell it to you right from the beginning? Yes, please, I said. I like good news. And she had finished her omelette, and I had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips with a napkin and said, as soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England. Who in England, Grandmama? To the Chief of Police in Bournemouth, my darling. I told him I was Chief of Police for the whole of Norway, and that I was interested in the peculiar happenings that had taken place recently in the Hotel Magnificent. Now hang on a sec, Grandmama, I said. There's no way an English policeman is going to believe that you are head of the Norwegian police. I'm very good at imitating a man's voice, she said. Of course he believed me. The policeman in Bournemouth was honoured to get a call from the Chief of Police of the whole of Norway. So what did you ask him? I asked him for the name and address of the lady who had been living in room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared. You mean the Grand High Witch? I cried. Yes, my darling. And did he give it to you? Naturally he gave it to me. One policeman will always help another policeman. By golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmama. I wanted her address, my grandmother said. But did he know her address? He did indeed. They had found her passport in the room, and her address was in it. It was also in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in a hotel has to put a name and address in the book. But surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put her real name and address in the hotel register, I said. Why ever not, my grandmother said. Nobody in the world had the faintest idea who she was except the other witches. Wherever she went, people simply knew her as a nice lady. You, my darling, and you alone were the only non-witch ever to see her with her mask off. Even in her home district, in the village where she lived, people knew her as kindly and as wealthy baroness who gave up large sums of to charity. I had checked up on that. I was getting excited now. And that address you got, Grandmama, that must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. It still is, my grandmother said, and that will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to be living at this very moment with her retinue of special assistant witches. Important rulers are always surrounded by a large retinue of assistants. Where is her headquarters, Grandma? I cried. Tell me quick, where is it? It is a castle, my grandmother said. And the fascinating thing is that the castle will be all the names and addresses of all the witches in the world. How else could a Grand High Witch run her business? How else could she summon the witches of the various countries to their annual meetings? Where is the castle, Grandmama? I cried impatiently. Which country? Tell me quick. Guess, she said. Norway, I cried. Right the first time, she answered. High up in the mountains above a small village. This was thrilling news. I did a little dance of excitement on the tabletop. My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself. Now she heaved herself out of her chair and began pacing up and down the room, thumping the carpet with her stick. So we have work to do, you and I, she cried out. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you are a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere. All I'll have to do is put near you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch's castle, and you will very easily be able to get inside it and creep around looking and listening to your heart's content. I will, I answered. No one will be able to see me. Moving about in a big castle will be a child's play compared with going to a crowded kitchen full of cooks and waiters. You could spend days in there if necessary, my grandmother cried. In her excitement, she was waving her stick all over the place, and suddenly she knocked over a tall and beautiful vase that went crashing on the floor and smashed into a million pieces. Forget it, she said. It's only a ming. You could spend weeks in that castle if you wanted to, and they'll never know you were there. I myself would get a room in the village, and you could sneak out of the castle and have supper with me every night and tell me what's going on. I could, I cried out. And inside the castle I could go snooping around simply everywhere. But your main job, of course, my grandmother said, would be to destroy every witch in the place. That would be really the end of the whole organisation. Me destroy them, I cried. How could I do that? Can't you guess, she said. Tell me, I said. Mouse maker, my grandmother said. Formula 86 delayed action mouse maker all over again. You'll feed it to everyone in the castle by putting drops of it in their food. You do remember the recipe, don't you? Every bit of it, I answered. You mean we're going to make it ourselves? Why not, she cried. If they can't make it, so can we. It's just a question of knowing what goes into it. Who's going to climb up the trees to get the Grumpold's eggs? I asked her. I will, she cried. I'll do it myself. There's plenty of life in this old dog yet. I think I'd better do that part of it, Grandmama. You might come a cropper. Those all look just details, she cried, waving her stick again. We shall let nothing stand in our way. And what happens after that? I asked her. After the new Grand High Witch and everyone else in the castle have been turned into mice, then the castle will be completely empty, and I shall come in and join you. And wait, I cried. Hold on, Grandmama. I've just had a nasty thought. What nasty thought? She said. When the mouse maker turned me into mouse, I said, I didn't just become any ordinary mouse that you catch with mousetraps. I became a talking, thinking, intelligent mouse person who wouldn't go near a mousetrap. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks. She already knew what was coming next. Therefore, I went on, if we use the mouse maker to turn the new Grand High Witch and all the other witches into the castle into mice, the whole place will be swarming with very clever, very nasty, very dangerous, talking, thinking mouse witches. There'll all be witches in mouse's clothing, and that, I added, could be very horrible indeed. By golly, you're right, she cried. That never occurred to me. I couldn't possibly take on a castle full of mouse witches, I said. Nor could I, she said. They'd have to be got rid of at once. They'd have to be smashed and bashed and chopped up into little pieces exactly as they were in the Hotel Magnificent. I'm not doing that, I said. I couldn't anyway. I don't think you could either, Grandmama. And mousetraps wouldn't be the slightest use, by the way, I added. The Grand High Witch who did me in was wrong about mousetraps, wasn't he? Yes, yes, my grandmother said impatiently. But I'm not concerned with that Grand High Witch. She's been chopped up so long ago by the hotel chef. It's the new Grand High Witch we've got to deal with now. The one up in the castle and all her assistants. A Grand High Witch is bad enough when she's disguised as a lady, but just think of what she could do if there were a mouse. She could go anywhere. I've got it, I shouted, leaping about a foot in the air. I've got the answer. Tell me, my grandmother snapped. The answer is cats, I shouted. Bring on the cats. My grandmother stared at me. Then a great grin spread all over her face and she shouted, "It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Shove half a dozen cats into that castle," I cried, "and they'll kill every mouse in the place in 5 minutes. I don't care how clever they are." "You're a magician," my grandmother shouted, starting to wave her stick about once again. "Look out for the vases, Grandmama." "To heck with the vases," she shouted. "I'm so thrilled, I just don't care if I break the lot. Just one thing," I said. "You've got to make absolutely sure I'm well out of the way before you put the cans in." "That's a promise," she said. "What will we do after the cats have killed all the mice?" I asked her. "I'll take the cats back to the village, and then you and I will have the castle completely to ourselves." "And then?" I said. "Then we shall go through the records and get the names and addresses of all the witches in the whole wide world." "And after that?" I said, quivering with excitement. "After that, my darling, the greatest task of all will begin for you and me. We shall pack our bags and go travelling all over the world. In every country we visit, we shall seek out houses where the witches are living. We shall find each house one by one, and having found it, you will creep inside and leave your little drops of deadly mouse maker in the bread, or the cornflakes, or the rice pudding, or whatever food you see lying about. It'll be a triumph, my darling, a colossal, unbeatable triumph. We shall do it entirely by ourselves, just you and me. That will be our work for the rest of our lives." My grandmother picked me up off the table and kissed me on the nose. "Oh, my goodness me, we're going to be busy these next few weeks and months and years," she cried. "I think we are," I said, "but what fun and excitement it's going to be." "You can say that again," my grandmother cried, giving me another kiss. "I can't wait to get started." Okay, guys, that is it. Another book complete. I'm going to stop there. And thank you again for listening to all of my videos this year. I'm going to have a little break now until the new year. But obviously, there's quite a few books on here for you to catch up on. I really appreciate all your support and love this year. This is a new little hobby for me. So to get as many as I've got so far is absolutely incredible. I just did it for the fun of it and reading out loud. I realised when I read to my classes, I loved reading out loud to them, and so therefore wanted to share that joy on the internet. So again, those who have been watching my videos regularly or have watched a lot of them, or the ones that have got particularly a lot of views on them, I'm genuinely taken aback. So thank you so much. Not as much as most YouTubers, but honestly, I'm just really grateful. And yeah, like I say, it's a pleasant compliment. So the last thing I need to do is wish you all a very happy Christmas, and I hope you get everything you want and have a lovely time, and a very happy new year as well, because this will be the last time I do a read along until the new year now. Thank you again so much. Happy Christmas and a happy new year, and I will hopefully do some more read alongs in the new year. Comment below what you want me to read next. I was thinking maybe a David Walliams book, but you guys can comment below on that one as well. Thank you again, and goodbye.